Driven Digital Agriculture, the World Bank. Warm welcome to all of you. You listened to a very interesting conversation on food safety. And I think in some senses, a lot of issues in food safety are related with what role digital technologies could play, in really making sure that we have data and we have issues regarding the traceability available to do with that. And we have an exciting group of speakers now to speak on this session. I just wanted to lay down the context for digital technologies. I think 5 years back, we didn't have data. We didn't have availability of data. We didn't have ways by which data could be analyzed. We didn't have data analytic tools available, which could really give us analytics in real time. Previously, it used to take almost like 10 to 12 days to trace a problem which is happening in food safety or food quality or disease incidents and things like that. Now you can compress that time quite significantly in terms of turnaround time because of availability of data. The second major thing which has changed is digitization. You could digitize almost any point in the value chain so that you are able to, get data in real time. Previously, all data in food safety systems was collected manually. And now clearly all that data is inputted into mobiles, which are more universally available. And in real time, that data can come into a system and get analyzed and corrective action can be taken. So data, digitization. The third important part is devices. I think you have been hearing about IoT devices, sensors. So now we have ultra micro sensors which can be embedded in the food itself. And you can get whether the food is getting spoiled, whether it is losing quality. And there are a lot of interesting sensors being developed and the cost is coming down so that if you embed the sensors, then you get information absolutely in real time. Previously, the data was collected, analyzed, and so the devices like mobiles and sensors is also a very important development which leads to a corrective action being taken there. And finally, it is the innovation. I think I'm following Romania for now last 6 to 9 months in what's happening there. And I clearly see that you have an impact hub in Bucharest. You have an EIT food lab, which is a food company. You have Patra Bank, and you have CBN Agrotech. They are all running a very innovative applications being developed in Romania itself. And they are working closely with the European startups. And you have a very vibrant system in Romania where 50 innovators are developing these applications almost on a daily basis. And I will send you some links after this event is over. They just finished a very interesting report on Romania agri-food ecosystem. And that gives you an idea about what could be the potential partners for Ministry of Agriculture, because this thing has to be done in partnership and consortium with other people who are in Romania itself. And you have a very vibrant Romanian agtech and food tech ecosystem developing there. So my strong sense is that if Ministry of Agriculture is able to develop an innovation ecosystem, and because the technologies, as a lot of people told you, will keep on changing, and you need continuously new applications to be brought in there. So I think it will be good to develop a collaboration. So data, digitization, devices, and innovation. These 4 are the pillars for digitization, and I'll stop there and I'll now hand over to the colleagues who will give you some examples and some frameworks which will help you to think about this. And also, please feel free to ask questions in the chat while the presentations are going on, so we can assemble all these questions for a good discussion at the end. So I will now ask my colleague Katie Kennedy Freeman to come in and make a presentation on what's happening in Uruguay. Over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Parmesh. I hope that you're able to see my screen. Are you seeing my screen?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it's wonderful to be here with you all. Thank you so much for the invitation. I wanted to share with you a little bit about an experience that we've had in Uruguay. Uruguay, as you may or may not know, many people have not even heard of Uruguay, is a small country in Latin America, and there's a lot of really interesting things happening in terms of traceability there. So this is a presentation where I'll focus a little bit on the case of Uruguay and look forward to answering any questions that you have. So a cow, a phone, and 50 million people. This is the landscape that Uruguay is operating on right now. Uruguay is a special place for a lot of different reasons. So the population is small, it's 3.4 million people, but agriculture is a huge part of the way of life there. So 350,000 people are living off of agriculture. 85% of all of Uruguay is suitable for agricultural production, and that includes natural grasslands. 12% of GDP is from agriculture or the agriculture industry. 80% of export earnings are from agriculture, and they have robust...
If you can move to, sorry to interrupt you, can you move to full screen, please? Because this is not showing up. So can you move to the full screen mode? Yeah, thank you.
Is that better? And 80% of export earnings are from agriculture, and they have robust data systems. So currently, the country is producing food for 28 million people. And over the past several years, they've developed a plan whereby they want to sustainably intensify and increase their production to produce food for 50 million people by 2050. That means that they're going to increase their exports to be able to support that many people outside of Uruguay. In addition to this, they have very ambitious NDC targets, including the reduction of emissions intensity of herds. So I mention this because when we talk about all of the traceability systems in Uruguay, often I get the question, how is this replicable? How can we do it other places? And I think the answer is that we can, but within the framework, we have to understand too that we think of Uruguay in a lot of ways as a laboratory, as a place that things can happen to be tested out that may not be so straightforward other places. In addition to the small population, they have a homogeneity within the population. They have good education and tertiary, secondary, tertiary education systems, and they have 100% digital extension across Uruguay. So everyone has access to internet. And in addition to that, the Uruguayan government gives all students and all retired people their own laptops so they can access all of this digital technology. So that is the landscape of Uruguay. Uruguay has a number of different, and forgive me, can you still see this if I do it like this? Because I can't see my notes if I have it in full screen. Are you able to still see this, Parmesh?
It's smaller.
But you can still see it?
The slide is cut in half, so if you can scroll a little bit, the maps.
Okay. Well, I'll use the full screen version so you can see it better. So Uruguay is, at least throughout Latin America, famous for its national system for livestock information. This system was created on the heels of foot and mouth disease back in 2006, and the development of the system was supported by a World Bank loan, which helped Uruguay to think through how they could achieve 100% cattle traceability in all of their herds. So what they do now is, over the past more than a decade, they've developed a system whereby they trace every calf from birth to slaughter, including every transaction that happens with the herd. So anytime a cow is moved, anytime it's sold, it's registered via a GPS tracking device in an electronic system with a wand, and it's uploaded and registered in a national system in real time. That data allows Uruguay to look at their entire herd, basically, so the government can look at who has what cows, where they are, where they're moving. It allows for better SPS, that they are looking at phytosanitary concerns, and they're able to isolate any disease outbreak also in real time. And this allows them to access better and differentiated markets. So one of the markets that Uruguay can access is in the United States, three never evers. And this is because they are able to show that they're able to show the production practices. They've been able to show the type of feed, they've been able to show where the cow has been, and they are able to demonstrate to their suppliers the type of lifestyle basically that this cow has had. In addition to the national databases, which are shared with partners, export partners, they use this national data for additional purposes like services to producers. So the government is able to understand what producers own what cattle and how services might be best provided to them. And they're able to provide data sets for groups of students, for example, where students are able to go out and study cows in addition to some psychological studies that have been done by the University of Montevideo on whether or not the cows are happy. So they actually look at cow association, and they're able to provide more qualitative data as well on the production system and the way that the cows are being raised, with the idea that in addition to tracking the use of sustainable intensification, so sustainable use of natural resources in this production system, they're also able to provide to their clients, to their export partners, more information about how the cow was raised. So this was the basis for a lot of the traceability systems in Uruguay. This was the first traceability system that was created, and it continues to be supported all through government subsidy. So none of these producers pay for the traceability, which is unique. Other countries like Chile, for example, do have widespread traceability, but it's not compulsory and the government doesn't subsidize it. Based on this system, the Uruguayan government decided that they were going to build traceability systems for other crops and other natural resources in the country. So following a drought event in 2009, 2010, the government of Uruguay decided that they would design what they call the National System for Agricultural Information. And this system is intended to help them make better decisions about the use of natural resources, but also the impacts of climate change on natural resources in individual farms. The system itself integrates biophysical market data, it includes climate data, and it sources data from individual producers in the country to then overlay on a number of different types of maps. So it identifies vulnerability, it quantifies and reduces uncertainty, identifies technologies that reduce vulnerability, and helps to identify interventions that reduce risk. This platform now hosts a variety of different types of tools. So they refer to the National System for Agricultural Information, and it includes things like insurance tracking. So they can look at every agricultural producer who has a certain type of index insurance across all of the country, which is then uploaded and overlaid on maps. And so they can look at that. They can look at different weather indicators. And this is what hosts the number of systems that I'm going to talk about next. So within the SNIA system, they've decided that one of the key aspects, not only towards the sustainable intensification, but also towards the demonstration of Uruguay as a sustainable producer and towards achievement of their NDCs, is traceability of soils. So this came from 1982. So a 1982 law passed Soil and Water Conservation Act, which established the technical rules for the preservation of soil and waters. And then in 2013, the soil use and management plans became a requirement for any farmer cultivating over 100 hectares of land. And originally these plans only covered agricultural lands, but they've been expanded to cover also rangelands. Now, 100 hectares of land sounds like a huge amount of land if you're talking about maybe someplace like Haiti or even Guatemala or Mexico and Latin America. But in Uruguay, 100 hectares of land is still a family farm. So these are people who have over 100 hectares of land, whether they own them or they're leasing them from a a national system that leases land, and they're required to use the national mapping of soil type, which you see here on the left-hand side. So it's called CONIAT, and CONIAT has gone through and it's looked at average productivity of the different types of soil and has mapped them so that farmers know, according to this model, the type of soil they have, the type of production they should be seeing. And that's coupled with, regular soil samples of individual farms so that this can be verified and so that each of these soil use soil management plans can be adapted to the type of productivity the farmer is looking for and the type of crops they're growing. And so together with extension agents, the Uruguayan government helps farmers to create these soil use and soil management plans and then digitizes them. So you can see in the bottom image, each of these little highlighted areas are actually farms that have submitted their soil use soil management plans. So not only can we see what it looks like in an aggregated scale, but the government is able to see actually what these plans consist of, what a farmer is planning to plant and in what seasons. And so the soil use and soil management plan, with the idea that they want to be able to trace what happens to this soil over time, will specify the type of crops that need to be rotated on what fields and when. And then the Uruguayan government uses satellite imagery to be able to verify whether or not the farmers are in compliance with the soil use soil management plans. About 3 years ago, we had an issue where the government team who was monitoring the compliance of these plans was having a hard time distinguishing between winter crops and summer crops on some of the fields. So didn't know whether or not farmers had been in compliance with the plans that they had created, whether they were planting the right thing on the right field at the right time. And so they started using drones actually to fly over fields and verify what type of crop was being planted on which field and see if it matched the specificity of what was covered in the soil use soil management plan to see whether or not a farmer was in compliance. The plans now cover rangeland. Last year, 98% of all of the plans were in compliance. So farmers who had done these plans were adhering to them exactly as they had entered them into the system and were able to demonstrate how they were using their soil. When we know how they're using their soil type, so the combination of the top map and the bottom map, we can make assumptions in models about the amount of carbon capture in the soil, the amount of runoff in specific watersheds. And this has helped not only with the long-term goal of the Uruguayan government to reduce soil degradation, but it's also helped them with inputs to models on the reduction of different greenhouse gases within their NDC contributions. Related to this, and thinking the Uruguayan government, and you sort of see a pattern that each system has built off the last. So thinking about the soil use and soil management plans, the Uruguayan government also saw that there was a large issue with effluent runoff in the major watershed in Uruguay. So the watershed Santa Lucia, or Cuenca Santa Lucia, which is the Santa Lucia watershed, provides more than 50% of the water to the capital city, Montevideo, where more than 70% of Uruguay's population lives. So this is a major watershed, and 80% of the pollution from the watershed, due to according to a study that was produced in 2013, is produced by dairy farmers. So in 2011, there was a major event where there was eutrophication and there was an outbreak of bloom in the water and in the watershed, and that affected the quality of water in Montevideo. After that, the government decided that they would create sustainable dairy use and management plans. So similar to the soil use management plans, where each of the dairy farmers with over 50 cows in the Cuenca Santa Lucia has to produce a sustainable dairy use management plan where they describe not only how they'll use their soils on the land in their soil use and soil management plan, but also how they will manage all of the effluent, manure, nitrogen, phosphorus on their farm for the use of soil, but also the protection of the watershed. As you can see here, there are over 280,000 acres of land devoted to dairy in this watershed alone. So the figure in the bottom left is just highlighting the outline of the watershed. The amount of area covered with sustainable milk plans is about 56% of that land. So that was as of April 2019. And just last week, the World Bank approved a new project in Uruguay, which will help to expand the coverage of these sustainable dairy use plans in the Cuenca Santa Lucia to manage effluents. So in addition to the other types of traceability, the Uruguayan government is also thinking about effluent management, nutrient cycling as a type of traceability. Within these plans, they're able to think about the amount of nutrients that stay on farm. And one of their key considerations has been to create a circular economy. How do we think about creating circularity on farm? And within that, how do we think about nutrient management and nutrient cycling on farm? And with these sustainable dairy use and management plans, we can actually do that. And we know how nutrients are being cycled on farm. And they think about that too as a type of nutrient cycling. This image on the left here shows all of the different farms that have been mapped and all of the different farms that have these sustainable dairy use plans in Uruguay. I am going to move on to the next. Okay, so the next type of traceability they are working on, and this is just in the pilot stage right now. So they're working on the use of satellite applications to track pesticides. So they started with a pilot in 2016 with the idea that if Uruguay will elevate its production to be, they're aiming towards a total transition towards agroecology. But if Uruguay is going to increase the production in a sustainable way and be able to demonstrate to the world that they've done this in a sustainable way, they also want to look at how agrochemicals are being applied and where. This has national implications. So they want to look at where agricultural chemicals are being applied also to avoid application close to schools, for example. But they want to be able to say in a definitive and transparent way, this is where we've applied agricultural chemicals. These were the crops that were applied. This is when, this is how many times, etc. So what you see here is a database that's managed by the ministry. The original pilot had 4 aerial applicators and 10 terrestrial applicators fitted with a GPS-enabled device where every time they went out to apply agricultural chemicals, their outline was traced and the GPS device communicated back to a ministry server in real time to look at where these agricultural chemicals were placed. The pilot has now expanded with the approval of this new World Bank project last week. And their goal is to scale up the pilot so that they have many more farmers who are willingly participating in this pilot to look at how to increase this traceability of these agrochemical applications across the country with the aim of creating a law around this. So you saw from the soil use and soil management plan law, and then also the sustainable dairy use plan, but that both of those came from laws that the government had created, which becomes compulsory for farmers to apply to use natural resources in this way. The government is aiming to have a law after piloting this, which will be compulsory for farmers to use GPS-enabled devices when applying agricultural chemicals so that the government is able to track it. There are some incentives to this, and the government does it in a way that there are some incentives. So there are subsidies for the tracking materials. The farmers get access to the system so they themselves can use the system to see where they're applying. They can use it in their own marketing, but there are also fines. So the laws are created so that if a farmer does not comply with the law, they will be fined. So this is the last traceability system I'll just give you an example of. Within the SNIA system, the National Agricultural Information System that I presented at the beginning, there are different value chain tracking tools. So there is tracking for poultry production, there's tracking for rice, there's tracking for sheep production, and this is an example of tracking for beekeepers and the traceability of honey. And it's just an example of one of the value chains that they're tracking, but they're trying to track all of the major export value chains towards different ends. So one of the reasons that this was one of the priority value chains, the honey value chain, is because they export a lot of their honey to China. And this became a requirement of the Chinese market in seeing the production of honey, of where it came from and what the value chains looked like. And so being able to demonstrate that became very important to their marketing in China. And on the left side, you can see all of the, it's a heat map. You can see all of the apiaries, and the right side is the location of all of the apiaries. And the idea behind the system from the government perspective is not just the accessibility to better, higher value or more stringent markets, but also if there's any problem in any one of these value chains, that they're able to immediately identify it and then address the problem. One of the things that allows them to be able to have this type of traceability in the honey value chain, as well as other value chains that they're mapping, is that they have a unique registry of farmers. So within the SNIA system, they have all of the registered farmers in Uruguay, the size, the type of production. They have mapped all of those farmers. They know who the farmers are. They know whether or not they've received different types of technical assistance from the Ministry of Agriculture. They know who they're interacting with, and they have a very good sense of the practices of these farmers because of the regulations around the sustainable use of natural resources. The last thing I will say is that towards this push towards sustainable intensification and boosting production, Uruguay, as I mentioned, has also been very conscious of achieving its NDCs. And with each of these different value chain, with each of the different systems to trace the value chain, the production, they've tried to capture indicators and individual surveys for farmers as they're receiving technical assistance related to the use of any agricultural chemical, or the type of soil, or the type of animal located on farms, so that they're able to add some of these indicators into their national NDC carbon balance calculator, which they then manage separately using the data from all of these systems. The last thing I will say is that in addition to all of the aspects that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation and how Uruguay is unique, they also have an interesting model for support to farmers and technical assistance at the farm level. So they have a private technical assistance scheme, which is then subsidized by the government and supported in any individual technical assistance by the government. So the technical agents, the technical assistance agents, are highly trained, and they're in a market whereby people are able to choose who it is that they want to receive technical assistance from. And that has made the extension agency very successful. It's also allowed them to capture a lot of individualized data on farmers and farms. So I will stop there, but I'm happy to answer any questions at any point that's appropriate. And I hope the Uruguay model is, I hope that this serves maybe as a taste of what Uruguay is trying to do in the traceability realm. And they're thinking about traceability not just in terms of traceability of individual crops and individual value chains, although they are doing that. They're also thinking about traceability of the use of natural resources towards being able to develop a branding around sustainable production in the country. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. And since you are going to leave a little bit, and before I go to John and Isabel, I can take some questions. I saw a hand from Florentine. Florentine, can you ask your question, please?
Bună ziua, Florentin este numele meu. Referitor la Sistemul Național privind informațiile agricole, aș avea cel puțin o întrebare. Cum se realizează trasabilitatea cantităților de produse de protecție a plantelor folosite? Și dacă aceasta este și reglementată? A spus doamna că va urma o reglementare în acest sens. Mă interesează să știu dacă se înregistrează toate cantitățile de produse de protecție a plantelor folosite la nivel de parcelă. Mulțumesc!
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask for help with translation.
Katie, the question is for you.
Yes, I'm sorry. Was there some sort of translation that I missed?
I can put also in English the question if it's
Katie, did you get the question?
Sorry?
No, sorry, I didn't get the question.
You didn't press the interpretation sign while this is going on?
I said if it's necessary, I can put the question also in English.
That would be helpful if you
I can't
don't
hear
mind
you,
switching.
Katie.
Do you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Sorry, if you don't mind, yes. Could you just repeat your question briefly in English?
Can you turn on the interpretation sign in English so that we don't have to repeat that, because we are short of time a little bit. So Florentin, if you don't mind, can you repeat your question again? But
yes.
Make sure you try and turn the interpretation sign on, please.
Okay, I put the question directly in English. I am interested if it's possible to explain if all the quantities used, all the quantities of pesticides are registered at farm level for each parcel that I asked.
Yes, so that is the plan, but as of right now, no. So right now they're only at a pilot stage. And so it's certain farmers who have agreed to be part of this pilot, and they're having every one of their applications monitored. So every time that farmer who's agreed to be part of this pilot applies agricultural chemicals, it's logged and it's entered into the system. So that farmer and the government can go into the system and see that person applied agricultural chemicals 4 times this week to these specific parcels at these specific days using this quantity of agricultural chemicals. But it's only the farmers who are part of the pilot now. The plan in the future is that all of the farmers will need to be part of this. And at that point, they will be able to aggregate across all of Uruguay to see how many agricultural chemicals are being applied.
Thanks. So in the future, it will be mandatory to use this application.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
But right now it's just in the pilot stage.
Understood. Thanks.
So we can take one more question. If anyone else has any other question, please go ahead. And then we'll move to John after that. So yeah, I see Dan has a question. Dan, go ahead, please.
Sorry, Dan, I think you're muted.
Dan, we can't hear you.
I want to ask you, Ms. Freeman, you said that in Uruguay, aim is to increase the food for 50 million people in the next future. And this is on behalf of meat production, of Beef?
The goal is overall. So the goal, they have a very specific plan that was created some years ago by consultants, and it's a balance of different products over, there's beef, there's milk, there's soy. So it's not just beef and milk, it's also agricultural.
We know cattle produce high amount of carbon dioxide, actually methane. And in this case, the carbon dioxide pollution will increase in the future. And we know we have a goal to reduce this pollution till 2050. And this is possible also by reducing the number of herds for the cattle. And how this will be realized in order to be in the same, let's say, way to the global policy of pollution reduction and climate changes?
So I think that's a great question. And I think their policy on this is still evolving, but what they're looking for right now is the reduction of emissions intensity in herds. So they have a global environment fund project whereby they're looking at Ireland specifically and what Ireland has done with feed additives and breeding in order to reduce the emissions of individual cows of herds, to be able to bring down the overall emissions intensity, to be able to increase the stock, but maintain the emissions level at the same point. That is their goal now. However, in the future, I think it could change if they have rebalanced the system of how much land is devoted to agricultural crops and how much land is devoted to rangelands. One of the key things about Uruguay, though, is it is natural grasslands. So it's natural pastures, and they actually have more trees now than they did 100 years ago because of reforestation efforts and afforestation efforts, because of the presence of natural grasslands. So I think there is also the idea that there is the potential for balancing some of the herd emissions with carbon sinks, and that they may achieve some net zero farms through the balance of cattle emissions and sinks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. I'll go to Diana. We have one last question now, and before we go to John. Diana, over to you.
Yes, please. I was wondering about the beekeepers and the honey production you had. And you had a map about all the producers of honey. Is your system centralized regarding the quality control of honey? Do you have special laboratories that do the analysis?
Yes, so there are special labs that do the analysis, and the information from the SNIA system on the apiaries and also the beehives feed into the national system so that the government can track where it's coming from, but individual producers also make use of national laboratories for testing of their product. And as far as I understand it, I'm not an expert on this, but I understand that they're testing before export in order to get the export certificate that they need to export to China. And their major export market for honey is China.
Thanks a lot, Katie, and thanks a lot, Diana, for your question. I think all the questions were very good. And now I'd like to move to John. Professor John Keogh is the Professor of Practice at McGill Center for Convergence of Health and Economics at McGill University, and he will talk about the building blocks of a good digital traceability system. Over to you, John.
Great, thank you so much. I do have a timer, so to make sure that I stay on time, and I have a 10 to 15 minute slot. Good morning from Los Angeles. I'm normally based in Canada, and for those of you who have not heard of me before, I'm actually from Europe. I'm from Ireland originally, and spent 10 years in the Netherlands building high performance supply chains across Europe. And a point to note as well, I'm a former senior vice president at the GS1 organization, where I drove the collaboration for GS1 with OECD, the EU, APEC, and others on traceability and product recall. So can somebody indicate if you can see my slides okay?
Yes, John, we can see that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'll jump into this straight away. The agenda for today, I'll talk about ecosystems complexity, digital transformation, and I'll make some concluding remarks. As Parmesh pointed out, I'll be giving you some indicators of the foundation things that are in building digital ecosystems that are very important. So I've been using this slide here for about 15 years to talk about that plate. There's a lot of discussions over farm to fork, seed to plate, and so on. But this is the complexity in a simplified version. We, as consumers, when we sit down and we have a meal with our families, and we look at this fish here, and we're often wondering, is this wild or farm salmon, and what species of fish is this? So the reason I'm showing you this slide is to show the key challenges that consumers face. And one of the foundation blocks that I would recommend for Romania is also to identify the key challenges from different stakeholders to make sure you have that mapping of the issues that may be specific to Romania. But if you look at the potatoes here, I know they look like eggs, and that yellow line, it tracks back to retail. Retailers will buy from wholesalers, who will buy from packing houses, who will buy from multiple farms. Now, at the packing house, this is where multiple farms will deliver their potatoes. They're washed, they're graded, and then they're packaged. So traceability really starts at that point. Now, one of the things that is very important is to note here, and one of the myths in supply chains is that farm to fork traceability is possible. Well, unfortunately, it's not. It's not always possible. So what I would recommend right from the start is you don't talk about farm to fork traceability, but you talk about farm to fork transparency, where traceability is a component. Why am I saying this? I think this is very important to note. In order for farm to fork traceability to work, you need the 3 Ps of traceability. You need to have the product ID. You need to have the party, the forwarding party, which is the consumer. You need to have the consumer's name. And the 3rd P is the premises or the forwarding location, which is the consumer's home. Now, we know that in most countries, there's still a lot of cash purchases and also debit card purchases. So unless the consumer is a member of a loyalty program or they bought online, it's not possible to do farm to fork because you don't know who bought the product. Traceability is about tracking forward and tracing backward. Now, solution providers want to fight with me on this one. They say that, well, we have a QR code on the product and the consumer can scan it, but that's only 50% of the traceability equation. That's tracing back, it's not tracking forward. So this is a very important notion. Now, as we start to build this picture here, if I'm eating a steak, what kind of feed did the animal get? If I have milk, is this a specific problem for Romania? This is a problem in several countries. Pakistan and India have recurring issues with milk dilution and adulteration. Is there heavy metal contamination in my food? This may be very specific for Romania. Are there issues that keep coming up? Is the food really organic? And when you have a credence claim like USDA organic on your product, consumers place their trust in that label. That sends a very strong signal of trust to a consumer because it's implied that the government was involved. However, when you send a very strong signal of trust to a consumer, the bad guys, the bad actors in supply chains leverage that. So USDA organic do something that's very, very important. And I want you to note this one for all of the credence claims in your country. USDA provides on their website a list of the companies that are actually genuinely certified USDA organic. But they also provide a list of the fake USDA organic that have been found worldwide. When I last looked at this list about 2 months ago, there was 151 companies and products that were fake USDA organic, and these are all around the world. So watch out for that. Now, one of our colleagues talked earlier about honey. Honey is a big issue worldwide. I don't know if that's an issue in Romania. Is there chemical or pesticide residue present? What allergens are present? Is this really 100% beef? Is my rice and coffee really from Vietnam? Now, I want to point out a second issue here, and this is when blockchains are used. Many companies forget, especially the solution providers, they don't understand the difference between data provenance and scientific provenance. So data provenance is when the data entered the system, and many solution providers will claim that they can guarantee provenance of a product, but they don't actually understand that the scientific provenance is the genetics of the product. It's the DNA fingerprint of the product, which is very, very different. So we've had many cases, even high profile cases, where it was claimed that a recall went back to Mexico for a particular product, and they thought they were finished, and when in fact the scientific provenance of the product was Brazil. So watch out for that one. Ultimately, what we want to know is a food safe to eat? And we know that unsafe food is not food. This is a very important notion. Now, as you start to build this picture, many solution providers will say that all of these things can be done with software. And at the bottom here, I'm indicating that it's natural sciences that really enables transparency and trust, because they provide us with that objective certainty in terms of the ascertainable and verifiable characteristics of food products. The other thing to watch out for, as well as a foundation, is that there are 5 pillars, 5 distinct pillars of the food system. Food quality, like in all of the claims that we talked about earlier. Food safety is very different. Food authenticity really deals with the notion of food fraud and criminal behavior. Whereas in food defense, you're dealing with counterterrorism, and it's a very different set of actors that are involved in that. And food security, of course, is another issue that needs to be addressed. So when you look at technology across the 5 pillars, the use cases will differ significantly. And in fact, the technologies may be very, very different. The other thing to note here is that to address food authenticity, you can't do that with a blockchain. You have to have all of the ologists around the table, the psychologists, the criminologists, the sociologists, the anthropologists, because you need to understand the problem. In Romania, you will have specific and unique types of fraud that occur, and you cannot address those with software or IoT devices and so on. So I just want you to be cognizant of that. You do need to break it down into the 5 pillars and look at regulatory interventions and also industry interventions. Now, digital transformation, it's not a destination, it's a journey. And there's a lot of things that we need to look at. Compliance, of course, is one of the key things and one of the key drivers, also regulations, transparency, policy, and strategy. But there's also, as we apply technology, there's also ethics involved. And there's also the UN SDGs to consider, and also climate change. So when a country wants to move from something like this, which is unorganized trade in food, to something like this here, where they're using technology to the fullest extent in the supply chain and also in the retail, this is a huge transformation to make. So down at the bottom here, the straight line is what many companies or many organizations or governments would actually put on a plan. It's to go from A to B and we have a straight line, but the journey is very, very different. The journey is, there's a lot of learnings in that journey, and emphasizing the journey might have considerable value for the firm and all of the partners. And focusing on the journey might allow for better mid-course adjustments as new scientific and social evidence emerges to address the sustainability concern. Now, the sustainability concern here could be the X concern, whatever you want to address. And importantly, the inclusion of different stakeholders might stimulate meaningful dialogue, education, and benefits flowing in multiple directions. So the net of this is a really great paper, is that don't focus only on the technology at the endpoint, focus strongly on the journey and the learnings from that. It's never a straight line. So I put together a model, what I call the 6 Ds of digital transformation. And the first D is digitization. The second D I want to put up is digitalization. Now, there's no concern here if you have used these terms interchangeably in the past, but now as we start to understand them a little bit more, we can give them more meaning and more rationale. So digitization has been talked about earlier, highly dependent on the data quality and industry standards like GS1, moving from analog to digital. We have to get that right. And when you look at digital transformation projects, in most cases, it's between 80 to 90% of the effort is fixing the data. 80 to 90% of the effort is fixing the data. When I spoke last year to the team at Amazon Fulfillment, they said 95% of their effort is fixing the data. Digitalization is the business process and role automation. Here's where you could apply concepts like blockchain and smart contracts and so on to automate the business processes, and also IoT devices or sensors. Now, one caution I want to bring out here is that when you look at the application of blockchain in a supply chain, blockchain in the supply chain is looking in the rear view mirror at what happened. It's logical because it's a ledger of transactions. When you start to layer IoT devices on it, you get real time. And when you start to layer AI and machine learning on top of that, you can start doing predictive analytics. The other key concern in organizations is, can I decentralize? Should I decentralize my data? And can I disintermediate? Now, this is important maybe for Romanian farmers, disintermediating from always having to sell your products to big ag and big food or big retail, to be able to use technology where they can disintermediate and break from those middlemen, get more margin, and be able to sell products to food service in their local area. This is a key component of digital transformation moving forward. And in Canada, we're looking at this strongly, as in other countries as well. The other notion is democratization. And I think it came up in the discussions earlier. Democratization is about access to the technology, and it's about usage of the technology. So think of democratization like Facebook or Twitter, and these platforms that are low to no cost. The US FDA ran a competition last quarter, and they got 90 different companies to present their solution for low to no cost traceability for food. So watch out for that. We've moved away from this massive capital expense to an operational expense that's either low to no cost. But the technology needs to be usable as well, which is critical. And datafication is, how do we churn the data and make sense of the data and understand what's actually happening and apply the learnings from that? And of course, the journey here is never linear, except for the first two. Digitization has to happen before digitalization. So some of the initiatives, just very quickly, that are occurring in new data exchange to revolutionize Australian agri-food. This is happening in Australia. It was announced a few months ago. In New Zealand, there's a public-private partnership called the Trust Alliance. This is based on a technology platform, and it does include the government. And in the UK, there's a multi-million-dollar project called Trusted Bytes, which will help with pulling together the data that's needed to export fresh produce from the UK. And that's been sponsored by UK Innovate. So in conclusion, we don't have food supply chains anymore. We have numerous complex supply ecosystems that are interconnected, but don't always interoperate. One of the points I want to mention here is that in one of the projects at APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Collaboration, it looked at wine in Chile, South America. And to bring wine to market, 70 different services were needed. 20 were done internally, 21 were done semi-outsourced, and 29 were fully outsourced. That's the complexity we need to capture. And my key learning for you here is that don't only focus on the product supply chain, you have to also look at the services supply chain. The carrot and stick balance needs to be there, avoid over-regulation. Public-private partnerships for national data exchanges are trending. Data and information quality are critical to success. And technology does not and will never replace analytical science. Standards-based interoperability is key, and enjoy the journey. And I'm right on the money with my 15 minutes, and thank you so much. Looking forward to some questions.
Thanks, John, for succinct and timely presentation. I think we have really stuck to the time and brought in a lot of considerations for what we should consider while designing systems and what should be the role of digital and related things there. What are the preconditions? What are the enablers which have to go with that? It's not a magic bullet. It's not a panacea. It has to be looked at as part of that. So I would again go back and see if there are a couple of questions at this stage before I go to Isabel, who's been very patiently waiting for her turn. So I can take a couple of questions, or if you want to combine the questions with both Isabel and John, that's also fine. But quickly, next 2 minutes, if you have a question, please raise your hand. Okay, maybe let's go to Isabel now, and then please start putting your questions for John in the chat while this is going on, so that we are able to harvest good questions and have a good discussion at the end. Some of the things I think would be clear from Isabel is the Deputy Director of a Digital Agriculture Convergence Lab, a very, very innovative sort of institution. And she will talk about her experience and what's happening in Europe and France. Go ahead, Isabel.
Okay. Yeah, do you see my screen? Is it full screen? No?
Yes.
Yeah, you see it full screen. Okay. Thank you very much for your invitation. So I have a timer too, so I hope I'm going to be on time. So before starting my presentation, I just would like to introduce what is DigiTag, the Convergence Lab in Digital Agriculture. So it's in France, located in 3 places, Montpellier, Rennes, and Toulouse. It's a gathering of 700 people doing research on responsible digital agriculture, and it's a 4-year project. So the aim of this project is mainly funding a PhD thesis, postdoctoral position, as well as internship, and it's also provides of kind of scientific activities around all this on this topic related to digital agriculture. And it is based on 16 partners. So some are research institute, others are higher educational institute, as well as private company. It's the box on the bottom. And the leader is INRAE. So now I'm switched to my presentation. The focus is on digital technologies. And before going deeper in this point, I would like to point out that there is 2 types of digital technologies for traceability. And one is not really traceability, it's closeness. It's how to connect people together. And one of the main development and use of digital technologies nowadays is more closeness than traceability. And how can you put people together, help them to connect? So there is a different type of technologies. It can be digital platforms. It can be also some kind of short supply chain or reverse supply chain. So what I mean by that is it's the case of the C'est qui le patron, which is that try to provide to help consumer to define what kind of products they would like, and then they look for the producer that will provide this product. So it's not what we are used to. It's more the consumer would say, I'm going to buy this product with those characteristics at this price, and then you look for a producer. So it's a different way of designing supply chain. You also have various types of apps, websites that try to provide information, or sometimes you have also social media component. You can find producers on YouTube that try to explain what they are doing. You also have producers on Twitter that share what they are doing, when they are doing in real time. And so here you can know more about food, about production, about what producers are doing, but it's not real traceability as we have, we think about it. It's connecting people together. And then you have some digital technologies are focused more on traceability. So you can use QR codes that provide then information on the product you are going to buy. You have blockchain and also RFID technologies. So here it helps to know more on the quality of the product. Is it fresh? Is it, do you have, if there is some breakdown on the supply chain, so the product has been exposed to different kind of unexpected events. So everything will be provided on the RFID technology, and so you can gain information on that. The second point I would like to share with you is there is sorry, there are different digital technologies, but you also have multiple traceability. It's not one thing. You can have traceability on the quality, so then you can share information from control bodies. There is also traceability based on certification and labels. So here you can use trusted third parties to provide the label. Some people prefer to know where the product comes from, so you can have some information on the origin of the product, and sometimes it's enough to know it's come from this region, it's local, so if a product I can eat is trustable. And you have also other stakeholders that prefer to have information on the process of production, how it has been produced. So is it a traditional product? Do you have pesticide? How carbon has been managed? Is it fair trade? So a lot of information can be provided as well. And for distributors, they are very happy when they can have some kind of information regarding logistics during all the transportation of the food. So they ask for a kind of mapping of participants, and then here you can use digital technology as well. And the last point I would, for consumer, you just want to have information on the nutritional value of your product. Is it good for your health? And then the traceability will focus on product characteristics. So it's not easy to define just one form of traceability. We need to think about which type of traceability we are looking for. And then it means that there is several issues regarding digital traceability. And one of the main issues is the development of data chains. Because when you build up traceability, you need to share data, you need to share information. So there is a need to develop data chains, data value chains as well. And here the points are linked to infrastructure development, so the connectivity, interoperability between technologies, but also a very well design of all the steps of a data chain. For instance, how the data are captured, are the data quality data, are they in the same format, how are they available, and then you have the data storage. Sometimes it's not so easy to store data very quick in order to have very fast information that goes through the chain. And for instance, for producer, you need to have some kind of edge computing in order to store the data very close from production, and then going to be transferred to the cloud using several other technologies. And data transfer, it's also an issue because of safety problems, as well as agreements. You need to have agreements for the sharing of data. And sometimes it's not so easy. And after that, you have data analytics, and you need some time to do some data transformations, because you have data from various sources, and sometimes you have a huge heterogeneity in the data. And the last point is data visualization. And for me, it's a very, very important issue, because how do you transfer the information people want to know? If you need data on your on the characteristic of the product for nutritional information, how do you provide this information to the consumer? It's not so easy to provide very easy, understandable data or information based on a huge volume of data. Then you need also to, not all the data should be shared. And it's really important to understand what is important for each stakeholders and what type of information they would like. For instance, distributors will be very glad to have information on all the transport of food all along the supply chain. But for a consumer, you just need to know if your product is of quality and if you can eat it, and it's going to be fine for your health. And you also have legal issues, and as it was said previously, also ethical issues. So the main problem here is data ownership, how it's going to be managed, and how data privacy is going to be also taken into account. And another issue is when you have data chains and you build up digital traceability on them, then you have new business models. And those new business models also involve new governance, new design for value chains. And sometimes we do not have the knowledge how it works. It's not how we used to, it's new design. And it's really important then to put together various stakeholders in order to understand how it's going to work, how they are going to connect, what are the strategy, and how it can be managed together. And one last point I would like to point out is it's really important also to be sure that there are not too much asymmetric information when we build traceability. Otherwise, you can the value of traceability won't be shared or among all stakeholders, and you can have some dominant positions among a value chain, and someone can capture all the value that is created based on traceability. And even so, every stakeholder will contribute. By the end, the value will be gathered by one dominant actor. And this, it's really important to think about it. And participatory discussion with many stakeholders is how this market dominance can be avoided or managed, because sometimes it cannot be avoided, but it can be managed so that all type of stakeholders can receive a share of the value that is created by using digital traceability. So my last point is trust and transparency. And when we think about digital traceability, it's really important to build a system that is trustable and transparent, and it's not so easy. And that's why it's really important to think about it beforehand and how it's going to be built, how the effect it's going to have, how if we are more transparent, it's not always positive. It can be also negative. So we need to speak with stakeholders in order to gain information on this point. And then it's really important to be transparent on who is responsible of what. Otherwise, if there is a problem, then there is no people that will be in charge to solve the problem. And this point is also something that is important to be taken into account. And my last point is the level of policy interventions, because, for instance, blockchain is not thought with policy intervention. It has been thought to be shared between participants. And if you need to put some kind of regulations, it's also important to think how it's going to impact trust and traceability about digital, when we think about digital traceability. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Isabel. And since we are running a little bit short of time, we have decided to go into the breakout rooms where both John and Isabel will be available, and you can have even a chat with each other, basically, because we haven't given chance for you to talk to each other also, which is normally if we had have a face-to-face, we would be having that. Just to leave you with some thoughts. I think as John also said, I think digitizing is very important. You need farm registry, enterprise registry, and digitize that part of it, because if you don't have that, you won't be able to build a system. Second, you need to have a good diagnostic on which part of the value chain you want to really work on, because you can't attack all the value chains and all the aspects at the same time. So what is the focus of Romania's transparency and traceability systems is very important, and to zero in on that. And don't try to do too many things at the same time. Pick up 2 or 3, learn from that, and then go to the others. The third thing is, please, there is a very vibrant ecosystem in Romania and Europe, which is innovating on this. So don't think you are alone here. Build a partnership in terms of developing an innovation ecosystem around you, and you will find that a lot of solutions are then available, which you can pick from and then proactively keep on developing that there. So, and a lot of resources are available here, even including INRE is also working on that with a lot of other agencies there. So over to you, Madalena, and thanks a lot for your patience and listening to all the presentations, and thanks to all the